Good afternoon and welcome to the joint CAD-1 BD Mackey Consulting tips from a Revit Geek. It sounds poetic, Brian. My name's Stan Henney. I'm the Business Development Manager here at CAD-1, and we have with me today, as always, Brian Mackey, founder of BD Mackey Consulting and one of the top Revit consultants in the country and actually often in the world. So, Brian, with that, we're glad to have you here today, and we're looking at Brian's list of tips here. And
it's always one of the fun things for me to do, and it's usually I have more tips than I can squeeze in the allotted time, so I'll try to make them pertinent. Just by a show of hands before we get too far in this, and you guys can see here how to raise your hand, how many architects do we have in the room? So if you guys didn't mind raising your hand, just trying to get a feel for architects versus engineers versus, well, I'll break it down between structural, mechanical, etc. Okay, so with that said, now how many people do we have who are structural engineers? Okay, and I'm going to, just because I don't have two tips to break it down, all MEP engineers. Okay, so we've got it looks like a pretty good mix. It's about 30, 30, 30, and
yeah.
I can't count, so I'm going to leave out that other 10%.
So we have 33 people, so that's about 11 each. So that's cool.
So that's pretty good. So just let you guys know, this is not, this is mostly going to be general tips for anybody to use. There will be some structural specific tips, as well as a couple architectural specific tips. But it is general tips, so it's good to see that there are more than just architects on here. A lot of times you see these tips and they are focused around one or the other, so just wanted to throw that out there.
And you see the screen there. Most of you have been on a GoToMeeting before, but if you haven't, you can minimize the console by hitting the orange and white arrow, and then you can see the whole screen. If you're hearing us now, then you're also listening to us on either mic and speakers or the telephone. And if you're not hearing us, then this won't make any sense to you anyway.
And that's why I left out the 10% on my 30, 30, 30, because there's that 10% that just aren't listening.
And then there's a raise your hand button, and there's, most importantly, the ask questions buttons. Now, it's going to be a little bit different format today. We always do this right after Revit Radio, and everybody wants to roll right into asking kind of Revit Radio-like questions. We don't mind that, but since this is a tips and tricks session, we may not get to some of the questions quite as quickly, and we'll go from there.
So the other thing I do want to point out, if I am giving a tip and you guys have something to add to the tip, please type it in the comments, because some of the best tips I've ever gotten is when I'm presenting something at a conference and somebody says, hey, did you know you could do this way? And some of the good tips I've gotten. So if you guys have something on there, you see me present, and it sparks up a thought that you want to share to the world, feel free to go ahead and throw those in there as well. So I didn't really have PowerPoint on this because I just think it's always more fun to go through and show it than type up all the things in PowerPoints. So I'm just going to pretty much jump right back into the Revit world, and we'll get going inside of here for Revit. So just to get you started, I have just an out-of-the-box Revit default template. I also then have my typical little building file for a couple things where I just want to grab things from a linked file or other scenarios like that. But most of this, I'm just going to be going right out of the box with just using Revit right out of the box template. So I did grab the architectural template, I think, but by no means does that mean this is for architects only. So just thought I'd throw that out there. So one of the things that I always like to talk about, and I don't see too many people get into, is on the Manage tab. A lot of people know that they have snaps, right? So we can tell Revit we want to snap to endpoints, we want to snap to midpoints. But I think that a lot of people don't know about in the Revit world are these nice little snaps dialogues we have for snap length increments. So this is something that I always like to show people, because I change this on a considerable amount of time basis. So you've all seen that when you're drawing something in Revit, it doesn't matter if it's walls, ductwork, beams, right? As I start to draw, you can see right now Revit snapping to 6-inch increments. If I zoom out, it's snapping to 4-foot increments. And if I zoom in, it's going to snap to 1-inch increments. Well, what controls that is your snaps dialog box. So the one thing I always like to tell people is as you're going through here and modeling, if there's something that you're looking for, my example in this case is maybe you're a structural engineer and architect, and you're thinking, hey, I've got to model this in brick increments or CMU increments. What's great about that is if I go back to Manage and I go to my snaps, I can come in here and change my snap distance from 6 to 8 inches or maybe 16 inches. And so now as I go model this, notice it's snapping to 8-inch increments. I don't even have to think about it, and I've just coursed my building. You know, same thing is true. I've seen MEP engineers going, you know, we really want to try to limit our ducts to roughly 2 foot of measurements. So they go set their snap distance from 4 feet or get rid of the 6 inches and make it 2 feet and zoom to the correct level. And as you're modeling, you can go through and get the different snap increments as you're going through and modeling. Okay. The other point where I really like to use this, and this isn't necessarily architect specific, but I'm going to use a door as an example because I get this question from architects a lot. Well, how do I make sure that every time I'm modeling that door is snapping a given distance from the edge? Or if you're placing in some sort of other object, how can you make sure this is doing what it needs to do? This leads me into also temporary dimensions. There's a couple things on temporary dimensions. But when I go to the Manage tab, the template you start with has settings for the temporary dimension. And this is one thing that I don't know if a lot of people are clear on, that the temporary dimensions are a setting for projects. This is a project-specific setting, not a machine-specific setting. So if I come down here to my temporary dimensions, I can go tell it when I'm modeling walls, either dimension to the center line of the wall or the face of the wall or the face of the core or whatever you're looking for. But more importantly, if I'm putting openings in, doors and windows, do I want a dimension to their center line or do I want them to dimension to the opening? So now this door I'm putting in is going to snap to the edge as opposed to the center. And notice what it's also doing. Right now I'm zoomed in, it's snapping at 1-inch increments. But if I zoom out, I'm now getting my 8-inch increments. So if I'm one of those architects like, man, we always put our doors 4 inches away or 5 inches away, whatever it is, go to your snaps and now change it from 8 inches to 5 inches because, you know, that courses well in brick. But change that value, so now, boom, there's a 5-inch door. There's a door 5 inches away. I'm not even thinking about it. And I'm just putting all these doors, and I'm getting those doors snapped exactly the distance I wanted them to be from that edge. So using your snaps, playing with it, depending on what you're doing at that point in time, can really speed up the process of increments when you're placing objects, modeling objects, etc. So with that said, and I talked about changing temporary dimensions from edges to faces to walls to openings, etc. I don't know if a lot of people know that I'm just going to draw a grid in over here for whatever reason, that if you have a temporary dimension come up and you didn't want this temporary dimension to start at the edge of this wall, I can drag it and drop it on top of another object to change these dimensions. So I can come in here and get in and say, hey, I want to go to this edge, so I have this edge to see what's going on. If I didn't want it to go to there, again, I could drag it over to this edge. And I think a lot of people know that tip. But the tip I really like is if you just click that grip, you can cycle from one edge of the object to the center of the object to the other edge of the object. So I don't even have to drag it. I can just click the grip to get it to cycle from one face to the other face to the other face. So I'm going to change this wall type out here quickly to be like brick and CMU, and I'm going to go to a medium level of detail. So you can see when I'm grabbing this temporary dimension, because my temporary dimensions were set to go to core face, it's automatically going to this core face. And by clicking that grip, it's going to now go from core face to core center line. And by clicking it again, it's going to go to the core face on the other side of the wall. Try that one more time, as opposed to the finished face. So when your temporary dimensions are set up to either core face or core center line, or wall face or wall center line, the clicking of the grip is going to change what it's doing from that one face of the object to the other face of the object. This is also true if I go draw a beam. So I guess I'm drawing a wide flange beam because that's all I have in here. And of course my view range is not deep enough, so I'll just go change my view range quickly to look below. So with this wide flange, again, notice how it came up to the edge of this wide flange, but by clicking this grip, I can drag it to the other face. Unfortunately, with structural members, the clicking doesn't work. It just only allows me to drag, but if you did need to know, hey, what's my clear space, whatever you're going to do, you can drag that dimension. And of course, once the dimension's dragged, you can always then click on that temporary dimension to move your objects around. Okay, so using those temporary dimensions, dragging it, clicking on the grip, getting it to move, doing what you want to do, that works really, really well when you get into it. Okay. moving on to a few dimension tips from temporary dimensions to permanent dimensions. If I've got this permanent dimension sitting here, one thing that I always like to show people is if you drug your text off and you want the text to go back where it was, I see a lot of people taking the grip, and Revit will snap it back to its default location. It'll snap where it needs to go, which is pretty cool. But if I don't want to go through and have it snap, what I can do is right-click and say Reset Dimension Text Position. That is going to take the dimension and put it back to its default location without me trying to have to drag and do that. The one thing I will say about this that is somewhat unfortunate, oh man, I hate it when I do that. Let me try this one more time. Edit witness line. I hit cancel as opposed to clicking off to the side. Let's say I took this text and this text and move it. When you right-click, this is a text string position. So it's not only going to reset a single piece of text on a string, it does reset all of the text on the string. So this is one of the ones I like, boom, it goes back. I wish we could just right-click on this grip and say reset this text position. So I'm hoping that would be kind of one of the ones that we can do when we get into it, but it might not be, that's a request I have. But so right-clicking, not on a grip, off to the side gives you reset text position.
And Brian, Chris mentions just kind of a little tip here that to add to that, that the temp dim setting is remembered for that object per session.
Thanks for that point, Chris. So yeah, if you do come in here and I adjust the temporary dimension to go to this face of the wall, it does remember that I went to this face of the wall for this view. So I'm going to specify a little bit more clear than what Chris said, but thank you for reminding me that if I had multiple level 1 views, so if I go generate a new floor plan for level 1 again, so I get my level 1 parentheses, if I come to this level 1 view, notice it didn't go to the outside edge. It still understood its setting. So the temporary dimensions do remember their setting on a view-by-view basis. So this view, it's going to the face of the wall, but if I go back to this view, it's going to the inside face. So that is a setting that it will remember on a view-by-view basis when you go through and set that up. So yes, thanks for that clarification, Chris, when we get in there. All right, so, and that is until I believe you close the project. Next time it goes back to its default location. So wanted to point out it's view specific, and it does do that.
I think that's what he meant by per session.
Yep, by per session. So when I come in here and grab this dimension, the other tip I always like to show is somebody's coming in and going, oh man, I don't know why you dimensioned this. You should have just dimensioned that wall. How do I remove that dimension string? Well, there's a couple ways to do this. One of them is to go edit the witness line and pick the object you dimensioned, and that will remove it. But the way that I like to do it, rather than having come in to edit witness line, get it to do that, is if you right-click on the controlling grip for that witness line, so in that case it's the grip in the middle, if you right-click on that grip, you get the option to delete witness line. This isn't deleting the string. I'm not hitting delete here. I'm right-clicking on the grip and getting delete witness line, and it therefore removes that single instance of the witness line. So yes, you can go in and edit witness line and pick the object that was dimensioned, but for me, I like to go through and hit right-click, delete dimension, or excuse me, delete witness line, just to remove it that way. I think it's a little bit quicker. The other thing that I use often, and I use this more so in family editing, but it does work in a project as well, is if you have a dimension string selected and you right-click on the padlock, right? So you see I'm getting into all these different grips we're right-clicking on. This is a tip in and of itself. Right-click on grips because the different grips can have different options. So this is a tip in and of itself. But if I right-click on this padlock string, one of the things that I love here is the show related. If I click show related, it highlights this 24'4" is dimensioning this wall and that wall. I might not have known that. I might not have known what I was dimensioning. In families, we've got reference planes on top of extrusions, on top of other extrusions. This is a real benefit to be able to see what the heck am I dimensioning when I get into this. The other thing that I always like is sometimes when I come in and do a dimension like this at the door, I thought I dimensioned the opening of the wall, but if I hit the show related on that padlock, it's going to say, no, you technically dimensioned to the door and then the wall. So I use this a lot because I have people give me questions saying, hey man, when all of a sudden I had this dimension string and for whatever reason one part of the dimension string is disappearing. Well, part of the reason for that is since I dimensioned that door, if I go turn doors off, since that was being dimensioned, that part of the dimension string disappears because the object I was dimensioning is no longer visible, therefore it goes away. So people are like, I had this whole dimension string, and now all of a sudden I was dimensioning my grid lines, and two parts of the grid line, the dimension string on the grid line disappeared. Well, they didn't dimension the grid, they dimensioned the floor or the wall that was near the grid or whatever that object may be, and that's why the dimension string is disappearing. So I tell somebody, turn everything on, go to your show related, and now you'll be able to see what's going on there and how that's working. Okay? Another little tip that works for temporary dimensions, permanent dimensions, or simply when you're modeling, if I were to pick this object and I click on this string to change it, or I guess I could have clicked on this one too, it doesn't matter. A lot of people don't know that you can start typing in values. But what's more important is you can type in values in any units you want. If I want to come in here and say that should have been 3 meters, it's going to change that to be 3 meters, even though my imperial units are set up in here. So this becomes really beneficial. I've worked with some MEP clients who they were doing a metric project, and like, man, I needed it to be 75 CFM, but my units are in imperial units, or not CFM, sorry. I forget what the metric equivalent of cubic feet per minute is.
Liters.
Is it CFL? Cubic? I don't remember.
I think it's liters.
Whatever, cubic liters per minute, yeah, CLM. So if you're dealing with the metric files, you can also type in, like, instead of, CFM, you can type in what it needs to be, and Revit will understand that. So you're not set to only the units you have set up. You're set to be able to type in anything. I could go say, hey, I wanted 254 millimeters and get my 10-inch equivalent. Liters per second. Thank you, Ray. So I could have typed in on a diffuser LPS as opposed to CFM when I'm doing this. The other thing that I like about temporary dimensions, if I wanted like feet and inches, I see so many times people saying 6 feet space 4 inches. For me, I like to keep my hand on the 10 key. So if I'm going to do that same thing, I'm going to go 6-4 because Revit understands you're separating feet and inches with a dash. So for me, rather than having to go 6, hit the foot mark, take my hand back to the 10 key, because I'm always on the 10 key, I just go 6-4, and that still is the same as doing 6 foot 4 inches. The other thing that I learned, I think it was last year or recently, it was within a short time, it was actually from a non-American who was doing imperial units, that if you type in 9, we'll do 96, and you use foot as opposed to an inch character, it understands that foot is an inch. So that's, in my mind, if you are used to hitting the inch key, it's a little easier to go foot than shift inch because you're hitting the same character. You're just hitting that one twice. So just a stupid little one that I use sometimes. Oh, I want it to be 120 inches. I do foot.
And Rick chimes in that the space bar works for that
yep.
too.
And so the other thing I was going to say is if you are doing values, thank you, Rick, I can go 6 space 3. That's going to be 6 feet 3 inches. You could also do decimal fractions if you want, so 0.25 for 1/4 of an inch, 0.125 for an eighth. Again, I do it this way, except for without the space, simply because I like to keep my hand on the 10 key. So all of that just going through and working works beautiful when you get there. So the other thing I like to point out is a lot of people don't know you can start with equals. And when I get into the equals, I can now do formulas. Let's say I wanted this wall to be 24 brick courses away. Starting with equals, I can go 24 times 8 inches, or 16 inches, depending on if it's CMU. And once you start with equals, it will allow you to start getting into formulas, so you don't have to grab that calculator to figure out how far you need to space it. I can come in here and go, actually, I wanted it 1/3 of 24 brick courses, or 39 or 42 brick courses. So I could start doing parentheses. So I could say 42 times 8 inches, and then divide all of that. That wasn't shift. Then divide all of that by 3. Michael, I said I like to keep my fingers on the 10 key. So my laptop or my keyboard has the little keypad. I like to keep my fingers on the 10 key keypad so I'm not bouncing from the space bar to the numbers. I don't type numbers very well, so I'm very fast at 10 keying. I actually have a portable 10 key that I can just do with my left hand as well, so I don't even have to take my right hand off the mouse when typing in numbers. So that's what I said with the 10 key or the keypad. So when you're doing formulas in here, you can type in 42 feet 8 inches divided by 3, and you'll start to see, hey, look at that. I've now figured out that's 9'4". So for me, I am a lot of times going to be coming in here and setting this up, doing the formulas where I get into it. The other thing that I love when I'm getting into things like this is the formulas also work for angles. So if anybody's drawn a line or drawn something like, man, I need that to be at a 412 pitch or a 312 pitch or whatever pitch it's going to be, what's great about this is if I have an angular dimension, I can click this angular dimension and say, oh, you know what? This is going to equal the arctangent of the rise divided by the run. So I'm changing 4/12 into an angle as opposed to a number to really get me what I needed to do. So I can come in here and say, okay, look at this. I'm just temporarily going to say arctan, boom, now I've set that to be my 18.43 degree angle.
Ryan, Lauren asks, while we're in context here, will it remember the formula when you go back into the dimension?
No, it's not remembering the formula. This is just it's a built-in calculator, as I like to call it. So, you know, rather than me having to scrounge my calculator up, see if it's got batteries, hope that there's enough light in my room because it's a solar power, I just start typing it right there. And again, using parentheses, you can get into very long equations if you want to. Oh, I need this times this plus that divided by this. As long as you're using parentheses, similar to what you would do in Excel or in any, you know, first year algebra, it's very similar to anything like that. And you can see I just use arctangent. You can get into like cosine sines if you're really into that. So that's partially why I asked if there are engineers here. Engineers love doing that stuff. So really nice scenario when you're getting that, just to simply be able to start with the equals and start doing things you want to do.
Lauren, there are places where you can set up formulas and so forth, like in various things. And I don't know if we'll get to that today, Brian, but there are ways you can do that.
That's all going to be inside your family editor. And
Exactly.
I'm not going to jump into family editor tips. This is just basically today, you know, just Revit modeling type tips.
Exactly.
So the one thing that I've always had to have done too is like somebody like, oh man, this is a crazy number, and I need to add this number to this so this becomes equal or something weird. What I love about that is let's like say, hey, I needed to move this wall 4 9/16 up this direction. You could use the move. You could do 4 9/16. Usually it's not that necessarily cut and dry. But what I can also do is use a dimension that comes up. See, I just said click on it, not drag it. But if I grab this wall here, I can take this dimension and I can go to the beginning and say equals, then go to the end and add that 4 9/16 of an inch to this. So that's the thing I like to do as well. People like trying to move roofs up and down, get them where they need to go, or say, oh, wow, this has got to move over 7 2/56 of an inch. What is that, you know, what's that number need to be? Maybe you're grabbing a string of things. As long as you start with equals, you can then subtract, add, whatever you want to do to that and move it the value you needed to move it. So that's very powerful in my brain, and I use it a lot.
You're using, you know, basically it's the same types of simple formulas that you'd use for Excel too. Mm-hmm. So it's not some foreign language you got to learn here.
Yeah, you can't do if statements, you can't do conditional statements, but you can do quite a bit by inside of there. So that's one of the things I really like to show and have people see is, man, using those formulas as you get starting and going, it works really, really well. Okay. So hopefully that's helping everybody in getting into that. So the other thing I want to talk about is kind of like in the same pursuit of dragging objects. I'm going to grab this beam because it'll work with a beam. That a lot of times people are like, oh, that beam's 19'7", but I wanted it to be 30 feet. Well, crap, I wanted it to be 30 feet, but I wanted the right end to stretch. The same thing is true if I take that grip and start moving it. See how that the length dimension is blue? I can start typing. And notice that once I started typing, I can release my finger from the mouse, type in the value I wanted it to be, and only the side that I was dragging moves. This one is huge when I found this. Because I'm constantly going, oh, I wanted this to be, oh, crap, but I wanted it to be 30 feet that way. So, you know, the old school ways, I came up here and I drew a grid or a detail line from this endpoint, and then I took that, that's not escape, and then I took that grid and I moved it over 30 or 24 feet, since I'm already 30, I moved it over 24 feet, right? And then I went to my trim command, or I took the grip and pulled it back to that object. I used to do that a ton when I first started modeling in Revit, because it's kind of how we had to do in AutoCAD. If I just take this object, drag, type in 20, boom, it's 20 feet long. So dragging it from the end you want works with any line-based object. So walls, ductwork, detail components that are line-based. Great tip. Just drag it in you want and start typing. So I think that's kind of getting into the same thing when we get there. So the other thing on this that I love is, anybody ever had to drag, I'll use a grid as an example. I really needed this grid to be really, really long. When I'm zoomed out, I can't get the grip. So most people zoom in, and then they've got to, I call it the claw. They've got to hold their mouse as they're trying to scroll with their middle finger and pan with their middle finger, and you're getting yourself carpal tunnel in your hand because you're doing this little claw. A lot of people don't know that if you take something you're dragging, you drag it off the screen and release your mouse. I am now moving this without holding the button. I wish I had a webcam going right now. I am moving my mouse up and down. I'm not holding that button. So if you take something with a grip, drag it off the screen, release your mouse button, now you're in the move mode. So now I can pan, I can zoom with my index finger, and I'm not doing the claw movement where I'm trying to, you know, scroll, pan, zoom with my middle finger as I'm holding down the mouse button. Again, that works with grids. It works with walls. So now I'm moving the wall up, down, left, right. And even now release my hand to go right to type in snap center or whatever. So just drag those grips off the screen. You know, I think the big one on this is when you get into levels. So many times I see people having to drag their levels. They're like, oh, this has got to go way over there. So let me zoom out. Oh, crap. No, I can't get the grip. Let me zoom in, then zoom out, do the claw, move it over. You know, screw all that. Drag it off the screen, pan, zoom, do whatever you want to do, and then click to place it where you need to place it. The other tip on this that kind of goes in relationship with that is, a lot of times people are zooming in to get to the grip. I want everybody to pay attention down here for a second to my status bar, because what's happening is I move my mouse up here, it's going to tell me what grip it's trying to select. Right now I've got the show bubble. If I hit the tab, I'm going to get the show or switch to 2D extents. If I hit tab again, I'm now getting the, oh, move the model end. Now I can click and drag without ever having to zoom in or zoom out. This to me is a bigger tip than dragging the end. And the reason this is a bigger tip, on large files, as you zoom in and out, you've got a regeneration process. So I zoom in to find it, I zoom out to move it. I'm waiting 30 seconds, and I'm sitting there holding my mouse on the button as it's waiting to regenerate. If you just tab, I mean, I'm zoomed way out, right? I can't even tell there's 4 grips there. But setting my mouse there, hitting the tab key, show bubble. The tab key, oh, modify the grip. Click. Now I can move these levels without even really being able to see the grip. So I think that's the big tip here is, yes, you can drag it off the screen to move it, but really use the tab key when you're getting into that stuff to start deciding, hey, here's what I want to do. Here's what I need to see. Tab, get all those grips. So tab isn't, I mean, anybody who's taken training or been around me, you know, I talk about hover, tab, click to get all of the chained objects put together. Hover or tab works great on what grip are you grabbing, what are you doing, and tab is huge. I actually have a shortcut on my mouse where I can come in here on my mouse and hit the tab key just by hitting one of the 6 buttons on my mouse. I use it so often. So that's one of my other little tips for you. Now moving on into the tab theory, there's a couple things I want to point out, and when we get into this, we'll take this from here up to here. So I've talked about you can hover over something, hit the tab key, and get a chain of objects. I'm trying to get the right example here. So one of the things is, if I hover over this and get the tab key, or hover over this wall and get the tab key, notice how it might be going different directions. So one thing about the tab I like to point out, especially when you're in a configuration, I'm going to try aligning this and see if this will do better for my example, that if I hover over this wall and hit the tab once, it goes to all of these walls. If I tab again, it goes to this wall over here. But now if I tab, I thought I could do it. I can't get it to work. Sure, I do this in training all of the time. Let me draw this one square. And then let me draw a wall similar to this coming off of here and see if I can get it to work. Oh, of course, Revit joined it as one wall, which I didn't want it to do. Hate it when Revit thinks for me sometimes. Let me copy this to here, pull this grip up. It shouldn't join. And it keeps joining for me. Let me make this a thicker wall. How's that sound? I might not be able to get this to work, but hopefully I should be able to. Try this one more time. I'm just going to align this wall and then pull its grip in. I guess I probably should have preset one up for this tip. Okay, different walls. So sometimes I've been in Revit. It's really not working. What I wanted it to do, and I can't get this to work, of course. What I was going to show you is depending on which side of the object you tab on. So if I hover over the inside, a lot of times I've had this scenario where Revit will grab this inside wall, but you're like, no, I wanted to grab all the exterior walls. So what I've found, and especially in a scenario like this, you can see tabbing multiple times will get me into it. But if you're hovered on the inside of an object as opposed to the outside of an object, you can get two totally different tabbed scenarios. So like the inside usually would come in and say, hey, I'm grabbing the inside connected wall, and then hovering towards the outside would say, I'm grabbing the walls that connect on the outside. So this is kind of one of the things that I was always showing people in a training session for the building we had, which had this pretty much same scenario, that depending on the side you hover. Now, here's a tip that most MEP guys know, because this is an MEP feature. If I select one object and then come over here and tab, notice how it now grabs the chain of objects in between. Okay, this is huge. MEP, if you guys don't know about this, if you guys are like trying to show what lights are going to have a switch, and you don't want all of the lights in the system, but only some of the lights to be switched, I want these lights on this switch and these lights on this switch, selecting one light, going over to the other light and hitting tab, it'll track the wires through and decide which ones need to be on that switch. So this is a big tip for MEP.
That's very cool. Really
great for filled regions, for detail lines, whatever you're doing. You can come down here and just hit the tab. And again, here's the other feature. Notice how I moved my mouse to this side of the wall. It grabbed them in a clockwise motion. I moved my mouse to this side of the wall. It's now in the counterclockwise. So even with this feature, if you've got a circular joined, or I should say chained objects, depending on which side of the object, you can get different selection options. So that's one of my tips too for the tab key is, man, hitting that tab, going through and chain of walls, but not only just a chain, a length or a given object of wall. So again, you pick one, hover over on something else that's joined, tab, and it'll grab between the tab. So I always like to show that one too. Okay, so I'm going to get into levels, and I don't know if anybody's ever had this happen, but right, you've got all your levels created. Now my levels are huge. Let me go back and stretch these down a little bit. So you might have all these levels created, and you know, if you're OCD like myself, you go through and you create these levels, and then you make sure you're always creating levels in a view like this. But unfortunately, half the time somebody will go have a little section like this, and they'll go into that section and be like, oh, okay, now I want to go create a new level, and they draw this new level, so now this new level is really, really short, right? So if I go back to my elevation, I can see that I've got this really short level floating over here doing what it's going to be doing. One of the tips that I really like to get into are scope boxes. So there's one thing that most people know about a scope box is if I come in here and I go to my View tab and I create a scope box, I can then give a scope box a name. We'll call this Overall. And what's great about a scope box is I could then grab all of these different views, including ceiling plans, and associate all these ceiling plans to a scope box. Okay, go all to your overall scope box. And what that did is that set every single one of my views crop region up to match the scope box. You'll also notice that if I grab this crop region, I no longer have the grips to be able to this. So I've just made every floor plan and reflected ceiling plan the exact same size. When I place them on the sheets, there's not going to be any haywire. They're going to be the same size. I can now, get them to the locations I need on the sheet and have them all the same size. What I don't think a lot of people know is you can also associate levels and or grids to a scope box. So if I had somebody create all these crazy levels, I can go select all instances of my levels on the entire project. There are going to be 500 of these. Grab these, associate them to a scope box. Okay, one point on that. I've got to make this larger than where the levels are. But if I, again, grab all these levels and then associate these levels to a scope box, they're now all the exact same length. They're there. They're the same length. And even if I disassociate these from the scope box once I'm done, I say no scope box, all of my levels are the same length. This one, to me, is huge. I get in their projects, and there's levels over here, levels over there. They're different lengths. People don't understand the whole 3D, 2D process of a level, so some 3D extents are not there. I've seen people spend days cleaning up levels and grids to get them all to be the correct length. Think about next time, create a temporary scope box, associate all those to your scope box, boom, they're all the same. Not only did I make those levels all the same in this view, they also went through the east and west view, and they're all the same level for the east and west as well. So I'm not only doing this in one direction, getting the same length, I'm getting the same length in both directions. To me, this one's huge in my mind. The other thing, and this is more of one for you structural engineers out there, how many times have you structural engineers had grid lines? Let me go create a grid here real quick. And somebody created all of these grid lines, right? I've got these radial grids coming on here, right? And this is great. I've got all these beautiful radial grids, and maybe we even had a curved grid on here, right? And then the project develops, and somebody comes in and adds a new level. So there's this new level up here, and I go to this new level, and the drag part is on this level, I can't see any of my grids, right? So normally you have to go back to your view, take the grid, stretch the grid up, and now your grid's going to be visible from that view. But how do you go back to the other levels and get these ones to be stretched, right? In the past, I've always went in and created a section, made my section perpendicular to the grid, so now I can see that grid and then say, oh, okay, turn the crop region off, and now take this grid and move this grid up. But who's to say I'm moving this grid even to the same height as the other one? Well, for me, I'd go create a reference plane and snap them all to the reference plane. Well, it's even easier. Grab all of your grids, associate those to the same scope box. I've got to go make my scope box taller first. Let me take this scope box and move it up to here. So I've got my scope box that's now all the way up as high as the new level. I grab all of my grids, and again, you can do select all instances if you want. Go associate these grids to the scope box. Boom, I go to level 6. Of course, you know, you might get lengths like this that might not have been desired reaction, but I go now to my level 4, whatever view it was, I can now see all of those grids. So extents-wise, you might not have wanted this, but it's a lot easier to do that and then to take these 3D grips and move them down. Let me just delete that scope box. So now that I've done that, in my mind, it's easier to come through here and reset these curved grids than to cut 500 sections to see all of those radial grids to get them where you needed them to be. I'm actually ashamed that I only came up with this tip 2 days ago. I have been in my career adjusting so many levels and grids to match the 3D extents that I cannot believe I did not think of this earlier in my career. I know there's been a couple buildings where like 2 towers coming off this one building, and I worked with a guy for 4 hours having him clean up all the levels for Tower 1, all the levels for Tower 2 to get them the right 3D lengths. I could have just created a scope box and been done with it. So just think about those scope boxes as more than just being able to allow you to go in and set your floor plans up correctly. Allow those to go in and set the extents of your levels and or grids. Can you do the same thing for section tag? Actually, I believe you can. So let me go. I don't know, good question. I came up with it 2 days ago, but I believe you can, because if I go back and create a new scope box, right, and then let's create a couple sections of the wrong length. Because sections as well can be associated to scope boxes. So I can come down here to these sections, say go to scope box 2. I think the problem with it is all it does is it adjusts, yeah, and I was afraid of this, all it does is adjust the 3D extents. So the left and right crop region got adjusted there, but it doesn't adjust the length of the head and the tail, which is really what I'd like for it to do. So it doesn't adjust the length of the head and the tail, but it does adjust the 3D extent. So I wish it would work for section tags, but unfortunately it doesn't. So hey, we tried.
Ryan, Steve asked, can you explain the difference between 2D and 3D levels and grids?
We'll save that at the end in case I have the time. You can get through a few more of these tips. The big thing about the 3D and 2D, I usually do this with grid lines and a floor plan. So let me just copy some of these over. That you might have a floor plan. Oops, that's not what I want to go to. You might have a floor plan where this side of the building is this tall and this side of the building is this tall. So you're sitting here going, well, the grids that are in this side of my building I want to be seeing on this floor plan, but I don't want to be seeing those grids on this floor plan. So what ends up happening is if your 3D extent is all the way up here, I'm going to close some views and tile them up here real quick. So one of the things is if I wanted to be able to see all of the, I don't really need to see the rest of these grids in this floor plan. What you have to do is take the 3D extent of that grid, pull it down, and now that grid is invisible in that view. But I don't like the graphic looks of this in my elevation, so I'm going to go ahead and convert it from 3D to 2D, so graphically I can have it up here, but three-dimensionally it's not going to display in those other views. So that's really the difference between the 3D areas, and this is really critical to know where your 3D extents are. I see so often people hiding grids or levels or sections even in different views because they don't want to see them, when most of the time the 3D extents would just take care of that. So hopefully that was quick enough. I'm trying to get through a lot of tips for everybody here, and hopefully that explains it. So the other thing, trying to get into different scenarios here, that I wanted to, and this is more of a structure-specific tip, and this is also in Revit 2014. Go to a floor plan. In 2014, when they created, trying to find my beam here, when they created the new beam families in 14 and 15, and I thought this was new in 15, I actually realized there was a 14 feature, that one of the complaints I get for a lot of people is when they start modeling that it's always got a half-inch setback, right? So if I model a beam off of this beam, it's always setting back a half of an inch. And I've been asked many, many times in the past of how do I get rid of that, especially for people doing wood frame. I'm not going to have a half of an inch gap in my wood frame construction. Well, what I read in the 2015 help is, or I think it was the what's new, this start join cutback and end join cutback is what that's controlling. Well, when they changed everything in 14, I can go make this 0 before I draw a beam, and now my beams are exactly connected to each other. So for wood frame construction, I do the very first beam at 0. I come back 3 days later in this project. I go do another beam. If I was a different beam type, this beam now is going to remember that set start join cutback is 0, and it's cleaning itself up as it goes through. So to me, for my structural engineers, especially doing a lot of wood frame, that was huge when I found that out when 2015 came out. Well, man, now you can have your default setback 0 for wood or ½ for steel, depending on the type of object you're modeling. So I thought that was a nice feature, being able to change that start join cutback or end join cutback. Now that it's been connected, I don't get that, but getting that started in there was really big when I found that out. So hopefully that will help a lot of structural engineers out there. Another thing I want to talk about, moving on for structure as well as MEP, a lot of people don't know, and this will work for architects too, that if there's something in the file that the mechanical engineer has or that the structural engineer has, like, man, I can see the structural column here. For whatever reason, I really want to get that structural column out of the linked model into my file. So you can see that is the linked model. A lot of people I don't know realize that you can tab to select objects from a linked model. Okay, a lot of people know you can do this. Do make sure that if you're in 14 or 15, you have these select linked elements turned on, because if that's off, you can tab all day long. You're like, man, Brian lied to me. I can't tab to get objects through a linked file. What's going on here? So in 14 and 15, we've got the new select links object. But if I tab to get that, what's really cool is I can see all of the properties of that object. But what I truly love is I can also copy this to the clipboard. So I'm not even opening the link, copying things and pasting it. I can come up here and say I want to copy to clipboard. I want to go ahead and say I want to paste, same place. Boom. I've now copied that structural column from the architect's file directly into my file. So now I have my own structural column, and there's the structural engineer's column. So really great tools, like, oh man, MEP has this toilet fixture, or MEP has this light fixture, or reverse, MEP, they've got a light fixture, I want it. I don't like the copy monitor tool. Be able to just tab, grab that object, and bring it right in, paste it right back into yours. I work with several of my clients, and I'm trying to see if I had any of the reference planes in there. It looks like they're turned off. Let me go see if I have reference planes in here. I think I do. No, I guess I don't. But one thing that I work with a lot of my clients, yeah, so here's a reference plane. So one thing I work with a lot of my clients on is what we'll do is we'll set a reference plane over here in the corner, and those reference planes are how we align these views onto our sheets. So I'll put a reference plane in my architectural file in the corner, and then I use those reference planes to snap to the guide grids. And then I ask the electrical engineer, the mechanical engineers, hey, can you use those reference planes and paste it on a 3-inch guide grid? So what's cool about that is, again, I can tab to get the reference plane through a linked file. I think there's one the other direction too, maybe not. So I've tabbed to grab that reference plane through this linked file. I can copy it to the clipboard. I can go back, say paste from clipboard. Boom, I now have a reference plane directly in this file. So being able to copy and paste from a linked model into your project really helps along the efficiencies of, gee, I need this object from them. The other little tip on how I use that, there'll be times it's like, man, this family is not abiding by my visibility graphics. What's going on? Why can't I get this column to change colors? Or this door isn't turning off. What's going on? Well, a lot of times I'll just copy the object from the link, paste it into my project, and the only reason I'm doing that is so once I've done that, I can hit Edit Family and see what the heck is going on in that family. I don't want to have to open up their file, edit the family in their file, see what's going on. I just copy it, I paste it, I edit the family and say, oh, the reason this isn't working is they don't have the show family pre-cut checked, or they do have the show family pre-cut checked, or whatever it might be. I can just quickly edit the family without having to close my Revit or open another session of Revit to be able to go see what families they have loaded. So the other thing that I love about linked projects, what I can also do is go into the transfer project standards. This is one of the things that I talk about a lot of times is with transfer project standards, what's cool is I can transfer project standards from files that are linked into here. So I can come in and say, hey, I want to copy the revision settings, or this is day one, and I know the architect went in and filled out the project name, the project address, all of that stuff that people go through. So what's cool is I can come in here and say I only wanted to copy project information. So I can scroll down here and say let's grab project info. I've now got the correct name, the correct address. Yeah, they probably have the wrong project number because my project number is not going to match their project number. But being able to go through and set this up just by having the project numbers or project information is going to save me quite a bit of time from transferring that project standard. The other thing is you could possibly go down here when revisions start happening. Keep copying the revision settings over. Oh, architect issued new revisions. They called it Bob, and it's issued on this date. Man, it's easier for me just to transfer it than possibly to go through and do it myself.
Brian, someone named Desiree has a comment here on moving the structural columns. Just be careful when copying architectural elements to structural, especially walls, because they won't have the structural property checked and so will not be visible in the structural view of the view discipline, or if the view discipline is set to structural. And that's a good comment.
Yeah, well, except for the only thing is if I can see it to copy it, I've got to have my discipline set to coordination or something. But it is a very good point. If I did copy it from this view, switch to another view to paste it, then
mentioning copying from linked files.
Yeah, so if I copy from the linked file, then the architect's wall is more than likely aren't structural, so you might have to check that dialog. So yes, that's a very good point. But if I can see it to copy it, my discipline's got to be coordination or architectural so I can see it in the first place. But yeah, absolutely. If you're copying and pasting, pay attention to discipline, things like that, all those normal nuances that, give us headaches in the real world.
And Diane kind of made the comment, and this probably backs all this up, lesson learned copying project information. It messed up her shared coordinates.
Oh, that's interesting. I did not know. I thought shared coordinates didn't come across in project info, but that's good to know, Diane. I'll have to research that one and maybe tell people to stop doing that because I have people do that all the time. So good to know. I will definitely look into that one. Again, thanks for the feedback. I love feedback from everybody. Keep it going if you've got tips, or don't do this, Brian's lying because it'll screw up my shared coordinates. I like to hear those too. The other thing that I also like to show people too, and this really comes back to the old school days of, I've had this happen before where I do a section and the section's really short because it's a wall section on a giant scale, and then trying to come back and select that section without getting the head is a pain. If you hold the control key, the control click, so holding control key down will allow me to select the section even if I'm grabbing the head. So I always tell people, oh, well, you can't grab the section by grabbing the head because the head's a hyperlink. Well, it's technically a lie. If you hold control down first, then you can grab it. Same is true for levels. So if I do go into a view and I want to grab the level and I'm zoomed in here, I can grab that, hit the control key, and get the level instead. So using control to select views, sections, elevation, levels, works well if you're in the bench and you're like, man, I'm trying to select it, won't let me select it. Just go ahead and use the control key for that too. Another thing that I always like to show people, and I always just assume this is common knowledge, but I tell people see me do it and like, oh, how'd you do that? Now when you pivot in a 3D view, it uses the last selected pivot point as the current pivot point. And one of the things is if you grab an object before you pivot, that object becomes your pivot point, including if I then deselect that object off to the side. So even though I have not selected that wall, you can see I'm still pivoting from that little half wall, even though I pan and zoom, etc. It keeps that until you reopen the view, or if you pick something new as the pivot point, then it'll now adjust to the new object's pivot point. So I think that's something big to me, because a lot of times I'll be like zoomed into a corner. I'm like, okay, I want to spin. I was like, oh, crap, where did my view go? If I just would have been zoomed into the corner and picked something, see, now I'm going crazy and you guys are getting seasick over there. If I would have picked something in that corner first and then pivoted, the center of that object becomes my pivot. The other thing on that too is if you do pick an object, I can then click on the view cube, and the view cube zooms me into that object. So if I pick on an object and then use the zoom cube, not only does the view cube rotate around that object as well, but it'll zoom you into it. Like, oh man, I need to go look at that wall. Boom, takes me right into that wall and zooms it into the center. So having that set up, knowing that you have that with the view cube and the 3D views also becomes pretty handy when you're getting into using it, etc. Okay, so I've got 8 minutes left. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that I really, really like when I get into things.
Well, I'll tell you, Brian's got a long, long list here, and so I feel Revit Geek Tips and Tricks #2 coming on soon, probably. But
so one of the things that I love, I'm a schedule fanatic. So anybody who's ever been in schedules knows, or been with me knows, I love dealing with schedules. And one of the tips that I actually love, and I picked this up at one of the AUs, or I don't remember where it was, is let's say I come in here and I add a schedule, and I'm like, oh crap, I needed this to be at the top of the list. So most of the times it's like move up, move up, move up, you know, and you get to see how fast you can click. But one of the things that's really cool is grab everything else and move them instead. So this is a fairly short schedule. I've been in schedules where this is way off the screen. I'll be like, oh, I needed to take this object, and I want to move it up just below mark. So I use my shift key and then hit move down, and I've moved the one up by moving the other 10 down. I use this one a lot. I'll be adding these categories in there, and I get to it. It's like, oh, man, I need to move this all the way to the top. Click, 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 click. No, I grab the rest. I use the shift key where I want to be. And the other reason I hate it is, I'm going to add a whole bunch of parameters in here, is what I hate is if you take this one and you hit move up, once you get off the screen, you have no idea how far up it's still moving or if it's all the way to the top. That's the real reason why I don't like this. If I'm like, man, I want to take Keynote and I wanted to put it just below description, I can scroll up to where I wanted, hit move down, and now Keynote's right where I want it to be. That's really why I like this tip. I got tired of move up, scroll, move up, scroll, move up. Oh, there it is. That's where it needs to be. So that's kind of my tip for the theory on getting into that. The other tip that I have that I set up in most templates I do for my clients is you'll see that I've got all these little Z schedules that are working schedules. I create these working schedules, and I started to realize that all of this cool stuff I did, nobody knew why I was creating these schedules. So one thing that I love to do, and this was in the old releases, but I can still do it now, is I take these headers and I group them. Once they're grouped, I now give instructions to the user. All right? I can spell user correctly. Group it again, and just keep doing this as many times as you want. If you're in 14 or 15, you can now just come up to your header and just say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and insert a row below. I still have to then merge these cells and say, hey, user, this is cool, please use me. Give those instructions to the users of what's going on, what are they doing, how's it going, etc. I really, really like doing that when we get into the schedule, etc. The other thing is if you are in the title, I'm going to go insert another row here. In the title, what a lot of people don't know is I like it to maybe say door numbering schedule, but maybe I don't want door numbering schedule. Let me insert one above. This will make more sense. I'm going to take all these cells and merge them, and then what's really cool is you can add parameters to schedule titles in 14 and 15. So I can come up here in 14 and say, ooh, I want to pull out project information parameters, and I really wanted to say, here's my project name. Here's the project name, here's the schedule in that project name. Or, oh no, maybe I don't want project name, maybe I wanted to know the project number, or what? Put the project status on there, right? Our title block might have the project status, but we can include the project status inside of the schedule too. So you might have somebody just looking at your schedules. Well, I can come up here and say, ooh, let's go to our project information, and our project status is not for construction. Not for construction. I can't spell, get my fingers on the right keys. There we go. Not for construction. That's project status. As the project status updates, it's going to go through and update the schedules. So if you have anybody trying to do material takeoffs from this and they're just looking at your schedules, boom, there you go. It's saying it right there for them. So you can grab parameters in schedule titles as well by using the parameter thing over here. So that to me was pretty cool, and I discovered that in 14 new scheduling. Okay, I used to have a tip in schedules that I would show you that you could double click this to get the width of the schedules. Yeah, that does not work anymore in 14. I wish that would be put back. But what is cool that I found out that they replaced it with, I don't like it better, but they did replace it with this, is you can now resize column widths. So you can come in here and say, ooh, I really wanted that to be exactly 2 inches. Boom, now it's 2 inches. What I also found is if you highlight more than one and you say 2 inches, it's 2 inches together. So all of these together make 2 inches, so therefore I've got 1 point whatever, or not 1 point, point whatever for the width of each column. So if you grab a range of columns, it'll give you all of them to that width. If you grab one, it'll give you one that width. So that's kind of cool. The one thing that I get frustrated on is I can't take that from schedule to schedule. I have to do it in each schedule independently. That I don't like. I wish that would be part of a view template, but it's not. And the last thing I like on schedules are a couple last things. I got 2 minutes left. With schedules, when you're getting into those, one thing that I really like about schedules is you can associate a view template to a schedule. So I don't know if a lot of people notice this, but I have view templates for almost all of my schedules. Here's a schedule for grids, headers, right? How many times you create a schedule and you're going to the appearance tab saying, oh, I want 3/30 seconds, I want 1/8 of an inch, I want a 16th of an inch, and you're changing all the properties on the appearance tab. The appearance tab can be controlled by a schedule, or excuse me, a view template for that schedule. So most of my clients go in, they have, titles and headers, titles, headers, border, whatever, and then of course the not for schedule template as well. So a lot of different things can happen inside of there. Also, if you get into things like, that's not what I wanted my drawing index. Do I not have a drawing index? Here we go. So my sheet list. Here's all of the sheets in my project. Well, a lot of people don't necessarily know that with sheets, you can include elements in the linked files. So all of a sudden, I can pull sheets out from MEP. I can pull them out for the structure file. All the different people's sheets I can pull out. But there's been times where I've linked in models, but I didn't want their sheets for whatever reason. Well, notice that once I said include elements in linked files, my property now has a new button up here, visibility graphics. Why do I have visibility graphics? Well, the only thing it gives me is I can choose not to schedule sheets from certain links. Before I realized this, I was always doing crazy parameters of, oh, okay, you guys put this in your sheet name, and I'll go filter it so it doesn't contain that. And then I looked one day and said, oh, there's a visibility graphic sitting right here. I can turn off what I want in linked models. So this is true of anything. If I were to go to a door schedule, and in the door schedule, if I say include elements in linked files, pay attention right here. You're going to see this pop up. Once I say OK, I now have a visibility graphics to choose what's getting turned on and off. So I've had architects do an interiors model and an exterior model and say, oh, gee, I have interiors and exteriors and demo model, whatever. I've got all these different models, but I only want to schedule the doors for my model and model X. Visibility Graphics to the rescue.
Brian, it's 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock.
And so I do feel, I think this has been a great session. I think a lot of people have enjoyed it from the comments we've been getting. So I think it'd be good to maybe do another one, and hopefully when you get back from RTC, you and Desi will have a whole flock of new tips as well that we can work with. But thank you as always for doing a great job both on Revit Radio today and this session. And
yeah, hopefully you guys all picked something up and it wasn't a complete waste of your time or something you knew, everything you knew, all of those. You might have, you know, a lot of you guys work with me and I spew those tips out all the time. So hopefully you guys all picked something. We do appreciate everybody spending time to get here. You know, it's one of the things that we try to, you know, share the wealth with everybody, just because, you know, the faster or the better the environment is, the better we all become. So.
And this one is, let's see, when is Revit Radio the next time? I think it's around, it'd be the...
it's always the 2nd.
7th, 8th, 9th, 10th of July.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that'll be Revit Radio, and we follow it up with a webinar, and I honestly don't know what that webinar is. I usually look about a week before, so.
And anyway, thank you very much. And this will be recorded, so it will be on the CAD-1 YouTube page probably in 3 or 4 days a week at most, so watch for it then. Ray, sorry we didn't get to your question. It was a little out of context here. Try and forward that over to Tony and see if he can get you an answer on that one. Thanks very much, folks. Talk to you soon. Bye now.